encourage you to come on Sunday morning. We're going to have a baptism. 2 people are being baptized on Sunday. So we have the water trough. We've got it in the pit, right? That's the pit churches do. They have watering troughs with baptismals. And so we have these 2 guys here, Colton and Matthew, are being baptized on Sunday. So it's really going to be a great celebration Sunday morning. So I would encourage you to come and join in that. This is a hugely important moment in their lives spiritually and in the life of the local church. Right? So please be a part of that. So I'm back like Jim Newcomer here. Maybe you've heard me reference him before. When I was first married, I'd never really been discipled as a believer. I had been in church. I was reading the Bible on my own. But my wife, much more spiritual than I, knew how to pick out a good church. I just happened to be a Baptist church. And as I attended that church with her, when we were dating before we were married, I was like, wow, there's something different here. This guy really preaches from the Bible. And then after we were married, we joined the church and began serving in the youth ministry. And we were in the youth ministry for maybe a year, and that youth pastor left, and God brought Jim Newcomer to Richmond, Virginia. And Jim immediately saw how desperately undiscipled I was. And he took me under his wing. And I'm saying all this to help you guys understand the value, the importance of taking somebody under your wing. That it's a part of God's plan, right? Growing the church. That each member of the church would take that responsibility of discipling somebody else and being discipled at the same time. And when the way sort of went, Jim took me under his wing, and he was very patient with me. Thank you for doing that, Jay. And I became interested in ministry, and Jim was like, well, seminary would be a good option. He gave me a list of like 5 different seminaries and visited some of them. One of them in Detroit, we moved up here. And because Jim took the time to mentor me, to disciple me, here we are. You guys are here tonight. You guys see how God works? Isn't that beautiful? God's so gracious and kind. So, Jim tonight is going to talk to us about life being a marathon, not a sprint. I appreciate so much about Jim's ministry. I don't want to build him up too much, right? But I'm really thankful for the years of faithfulness as he has pastored, as he has served in local churches, as he's been faithful to the local church and God's call in his life. And faithfulness is so important. I'm so thankful for your faithfulness. Thank you, Jim. So come on up here.
Thanks, bro. Love you too, bud. You guys know not to believe any of that, right? You know him? No, Jay, I appreciate your gracious words. We have some good memories. Going back to 1994 when we met. You kind of discipled me at the same time. I remember the first time, it's like, let's get together and study the Word and pray together. And it's like, okay, we'll go to a breakfast. And we went like 6 in the morning to a breakfast because he was a physical therapist in town. I went to this breakfast diner, and he said, what do you want to do? I'm saying, let's study Colossians. Let's do Colossians. He says, better yet, I want to memorize Colossians, and you're going to memorize it too. We'll start with Colossians 3. So he immediately took control of the whole thing, right? And he made me memorize Colossians 3, and we both got it down, and we liked it so much, he said, okay, we're going to go back and do Colossians 1. And he just was out of control. It was a joy to serve in youth ministry with Jay, and just to watch what God's done with him and Kristen through all these years. And it's really fun to be with you guys tonight. I've been able to talk to some of you. We're right in that 3-minute window point right now where we're forming our opinion of each other. You don't know me, I don't know most of you. And the best thing I can do to cut to the chase is I'm 55 years old. I'm going into the holidays 10 pounds heavier than I want to. I'm working on that. And I didn't really try hard tonight. I love this food. As far as sports, I love all the Detroit teams. As far as playing sports, wrestled a little in 9th grade, played soccer all the way through high school, a little bit into college, that's it. not a real good athlete. You say, do you golf? I got over it. I quit golfing, right, when I was 40. And my son wanted to do something together, and I wasn't any good at golf, so I said, well, what do you want to do? And he wanted to do karate. And so I did that with my son for a couple of years, and loved it way more than golf. That's about me in a nutshell. That, and I'm a pastor, okay? It's not too complicated. But I'd like to know stuff about you guys. I want to know who I'm talking to. How many of you would say, either right now or in your younger years, you were an athlete? Raise your hand. Anyone? All right. Some of you are being shy, I think. Okay. So how many of you would say you are a runner? Raise your hand. All right. My gratefulness for you and respect for you just goes way up if you say you're a runner. I'm not a runner. Not a runner. All three of my kids are runners. I have one daughter. She's running half marathons. She wants to run a full marathon. She has to train for it. I don't run at all. But I am fascinated with watching people run and train for it. As a matter of fact, I understand that a 100-meter sprinter is really running the equivalent of 109 yards. And if you compare a 100-meter sprinter with a marathon runner is running 26.2 miles, and it takes about 4 to 5 hours to run that. It takes seconds to run a 100-meter sprint, and it takes 4 to 5 hours to run a marathon. I'm not a runner, but I can make this observation from watching runners. Not all sprinters can run a marathon, but all marathoners can run a sprint. And a lot of times, I think this transfers over into our lives as men and as disciples of Jesus Christ. And we talk about this area of personal discipline. And a lot of times as men, we hear this concept of personal discipline and growing as a disciple, and we hear it through the ears of a sprinter. We're like, okay, I just heard a good sermon on it. I heard a good podcast. John Piper said this, or Keller said this, and I need to do better. And so we take off on a sprint towards personal discipline, and we try to keep that pace up for the distance of a marathon. And you can't do it. You can't do it. When it comes to personal discipline and growing as a disciple of Jesus, you need a marathon mindset, all right? Marathons take training, they take planning, but for the long haul, it pays off. So last month, I got a text message, or actually just a few weeks ago, so I guess it was last month. I got a text message from Jay Searcy. It was early one morning, and I wasn't expecting it, and it was asking me to do something I've never done before. Here's the text message. Jim, would you speak to our guys regarding organizational skills? It would be basic and should be just you sharing how you organize ministry and personal time in a manner pleasing to God, end quote. I've never gotten a request like that. I've been teaching in different settings since 2000, in academic settings. I've never been asked to do something like that. And that was a surprise text message, and I immediately was looking for an opportunity to say, no, I'm not your guy for this. Number one, I've never spoken on this. Number two, I'm looking at my own life. And there were 4 things that made me just personally hesitate to say yes to being here tonight. Number one, God knows how much I need my wife. In Genesis chapter 2, verses 18 to 24, you've heard Jay speak on it before. God knew that I was so incomplete. I needed to have my wife to complete me. And my wife is everything organized, everything diligent, and I so need her in my life. So why am I the one that's speaking on organization? But there was a second reason I was hesitant, and it was this. I fight my flesh every day just like you guys. I don't want to be diligent. I don't want to be organized. I don't want to run towards people all the time. I don't want to fix things. And immediately my flesh, I know and maybe you guys can relate to this, I just want to sit down and relax and chill. And I understand when Paul writes in 1 Corinthians chapter 9 that I have to box myself, deliver knockout blows to my own self, my own body. As Jerry Bridges says in one of his books, I need to knock out my body regularly so I can remind my body who's in charge. You know, I'm familiar with that battle. So why do I have to speak on organization? A third reason I was hesitant is this. I grimace at the condition of my own field. Relationships in my life, ministry. I've been in the ministry, pastoral ministry since 94, and I'm not happy still when I look around, and these words from Proverbs haunt me. Proverbs 24, I passed by the field of the sluggard and by the vineyard of the man lacking sense, and behold, it was completely overgrown with thistles. Its surface was covered with nettles, and its stone wall was broken down. And when I saw, I reflected upon it. I looked, and I received instruction. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and your poverty will come as a robber and your want like an armed man. I mean, this is a guy, he's looking over at his neighbor's yard, and it's been let go. And he's not tending to it every day like he needs to. And the neighbor's not changing it, but the guy looking at it is learning a lesson. You know, I think of that scene of those two neighbors, and I'm like, I can relate to that because I see things in my own life and ministry and relationships that I've let go from time to time. So why do I have to speak on being organized, you know? A fourth reason, though, is this, why I'm hesitant. It's because I know how far I need to go in order to grow in my own Christ-likeness. You know, I look at Jesus in the Gospel of John, chapter 4, verse 34, and Jesus says, I've come to do my Father's will, right? How many times has he said that in the Gospels? That's John 4. You go to John 17, and you're in the upper room discourse, hours away from the betrayal, right? And what does Jesus say in his prayer to his Father in John 17:4? I've done what you've sent me to do. So if we're going to grow in organization, we're growing in Christ-likeness because Christ was kind of busy. But Christ had figured out not only how to get his Father's will done, but also how to have necessary rest. He knew how to stay busy and still remain satisfied and stay on mission and not get distracted. So look at all that. And that's why I was hesitant to say yes to Jay when he texted me that morning. We say, why'd you say yes? Well, because of two theological foundations. I'll be hard on myself. But there's two theological foundations that continue to call out to me, and guys, I think they call out to you as well. And it calls out, these two theological truths call out to us that no matter how far we have to go, no matter where we are now, no matter what successes and failures we have in personal discipline, we must continue to press on in the grace of the gospel. You say, what are those two theological foundations for discipline? Number one is the imago Dei, the image of God. You and I are image bearers of God. And that right there could take weeks to explain and define and preach and teach on. But one element I want to point out is this. In 1 Corinthians chapter 14, we know this. God's not an author of confusion. He does things in an orderly fashion. You see that in the creation week, and you see it from the beginning of the Bible to the end. He is a God of discipline, of personal discipline, if I can use a human description there. That's one of the theological foundations. The second one is a text that I want you to look at with me here at the beginning. We're going to come back to this in our study tonight too. Look with me at 1 Timothy chapter 4. 1 Timothy chapter 4. And I'm reading out of the New American Standard here this evening. 1 Timothy chapter 4, Paul says to Timothy, he says, have nothing to do with worldly fables fit only for old women. On the other hand, and here's a phrase I want you to grab a hold of right now, because you're going to need to hold on to it for the whole time this evening. On the other hand, discipline yourself for the purpose of godliness. What's the end goal? Godliness. Being like God, being like Christ in our character. But what must set the stage for godliness? He tells us here. You and I must discipline ourselves as Christians. I'm making assumptions here that you've accepted the gospel of Jesus Christ, that He Himself indwells you and animates you with His grace to do His will. Okay? I'm making that assumption. But that doesn't mean it's going to be easy work. He says you got to discipline yourself. You have to, and the idea here is, as Kent Hughes says in his book, Disciplines of a Godly Man, if there's any spiritual progress in your personal discipline and discipleship, it's always going to have the reek of spiritual sweat. So watch this, guys. The end goal is godliness. How do we get to godliness? Well, he says here, you have to discipline yourself. So if discipline precedes godliness, then I have a question. What must precede discipline? What sets the stage for discipline? And the answer for that, I believe, is the concept of structure. Structure, having a plan. Structure precedes discipline. Discipline precedes godliness. You got to have structure, listen guys, because discipline doesn't happen on accident. Discipline takes a plan. Discipline isn't like a blind squirrel that finds a nut every once in a while, or like John MacArthur says, it's not like a stop clock being right twice a day. It's more than that. If we want discipline, we want it to be something that defines us with a growing intention all the time. So I can be hard on myself because I see how far I still have to go, even at 55 years old. But what keeps me going are these two theological foundations. And that's where I want to throw my challenge out to you guys. It's important to have a concrete plan. Someone once said, he who aims at nothing is sure to hit what? Nothing, right? Another statement is, he who plans his program for tomorrow takes the confusion out of today. I like that. Someone else said, when you fail to plan, you plan to what? Fail. And then the Chinese have a proverb, and it goes like this. Dig a well before you're thirsty. Think ahead. Have a plan. So what's my goal tonight? My goal is this. I want to leave you with a 5-part plan to chew on, to consider. You can debate it. Great. Discuss it. Don't adopt it. I'm going to share a plan with you that's working for me. But adapt it after this event, after you as a church of men, a church fellowship of men in these groups can discuss. My goal is to suggest a 5-part plan to you. That's it. In other words, I'm not asking you to become sprinters tonight. That's too easy and it's too fast and it doesn't really go the distance. I'm not asking you to sprint, I'm asking you to marathon. And then, since we're getting ready to cross over into a new year in a few weeks, I'm asking you to marathon all the way through 2022. And towards the end of 2022, check back in with each other. All right? Have a plan. Have a plan. So what's the first part of the plan? The first part of the plan is what I'm going to call get honest. And again, these are just things I've reflected on since I got this text message from your pastor. And where I always have to start, and this is where you need to start no matter what area of your life you want to grow in. You have to start with this. What lies have I been believing? So we need to start out right here. We're not starting out with try harder. We're not starting out with 50 push-ups. We're starting out with what lies have you been believing? And what are the main lies that work against you being disciplined as a disciple of Jesus Christ? Proverbs 23 verse 7 says, as a man thinks within himself, so is he. I want you to wrestle with 7 lies and see if you've been believing these lies. All right? Lie number 1. If I'm going to be self-disciplined, if I'm going to be personally disciplined, growing in discipline as a disciple of Jesus, then I have to be just like, and then fill in the blank. Say, who do we put in that blank? Well, you have to fill it in. I don't know who it is in your life. But as soon as you start hearing about personal discipline as a disciple of Jesus, you already have a couple names and faces come to your mind, don't you? And you think, well, I got to be like so-and-so. And I'm going to challenge that right off the bat. We don't need another copy of whoever is in your blank. Unless, of course, it's Jesus, but work with me here. Okay? You're thinking of an elder, perhaps. You're thinking of a father or a grandparent. And these are good examples, and even Paul says, follow my example as I follow Christ, 1 Corinthians 11:1. But a lot of times we say, well, I just don't know that I can put the energy in it and become a marathoner when it comes to spiritual discipline, because then I'd have to be like, and then you fill in the blank. Don't do that. I mean, this one's dead before it starts, if you believe this lie. And again, Paul said in 2 Corinthians 10, verse 12, we're not bold to class or compare ourselves with some of those who commend themselves. But when they measure themselves by themselves and compare themselves with themselves, they are without understanding. And there's a lot that could be said in the context of the church at Corinth with that, and the problem with Paul, or coming towards Paul from some of the people in Corinth. But don't miss the principle here. We don't go through life comparing ourselves with other people. That is not from understanding. There's a book, when I met Jay, right before I moved to Richmond, I went to a friend who was a youth pastor up in Indianapolis. I said, if you could read one book on youth ministry, what book would that be, if you could recommend one? And he immediately gave me the name. I still remember it. I still have my copy. It's called Back to the Heart of Youth Work by a guy named Dewey Bertolini. Dewey Bertolini, you have that book, right? We read through it together. Dewey Bertolini was the guy that got the youth ministry major going out at used to be Masters College out in California. And this was a good recommendation to me. It's an outstanding book. It's out of print, but you can find it used still. But there's an illustration in that book of Dewey when he was in Bible college taking his pulpit speech class. And Dewey Bertolini's favorite preacher when he was in college was Billy Graham. He loved Billy Graham with his intensity in the pulpit. He loved the intensity of his gospel presentation. And what Dewey wanted to do is just Billy Graham all over again. And so when it came time for Dewey in pulpit speech class to preach his first sermon, I mean, he got up there and he let it rip. And he preached it just like Billy Graham would preach it, because that's who he wanted to emulate. So he finishes his sermon, he sits down, he listens to the teacher give him his grade, and the teacher gave him a decent grade on that sermon. But then in front of the class, he says, I'm giving you a good grade because you had intensity, the speech part was good. He says, as a matter of fact, Dewey, you sounded just like Billy Graham. And when the teacher said that, Dewey just smiled. I mean, you couldn't say anything more to Dewey that he would want to hear than that. And then the teacher says, don't ever do that again in this class. And Dewey's like, what? And the teacher says, we've already had a Billy Graham. What we need is a first Dewey. You know, Paul's wisdom here just needs to kick the legs out from this lie in your life if you're struggling with this. This is what's holding you back from really having a grace-filled effort to grow in personal discipline. If you're saying, well, then I'm going to have to be like so-and-so. No. You need to be a spirit-filled you. We need a first you. So don't fall prey to that lie. There's a second lie, and this is the lie that says, I just have to get through and then fill in the blank, so then I can get on with life and discipline. You ever hear this lie before? Have you listened to this lie before? You say, well, how do people fill in that blank? Oh, they can fill the blank in with different things. They can say, I need to get through the COVID crisis first, and then I'll get serious about personal discipline. And this is affecting a lot of our churches, people not coming back or being sluggish of re-engaging. Other people may say, well, I'm not going to get serious about life and discipline until I get through this busy season of my life. You know, we have newborns. I just need to get through this season, and then I'll get serious. Or I just got married, and I need to get married, and I just want to get to that point, and then I'll get serious about discipline. Other people will say, I'm just so busy with work. I'm so busy with this project. Once I get through this, no, I'll be there, man. And I'll be serious about this. Other people say, once I get through this sin struggle, then I'll get serious. Once I get through this stressor, once I get through this depression. I mean, you fill in the blank. But that's just a lie that has taken all of us down time and time again. So what does God's Word say about something like this? Well, it's interesting. If you look at Romans 5, 1 through 5, just write that down for now. If you look at James, chapter 1, verses 2 through 4, so you have Romans 5, 1 through 5. You have James 1, verses 2 through 4. Let me give you another one. 2 Peter 1, 5 through 11. What I've given you are three passages you know from three different authors in the New Testament. And every last one of them, Paul, Peter, and James, all say, unless you go through these seasons, you can't grow. If you're waiting for a pause in your life where you can just have a little break from pressure, a little break from pain, you're going to die waiting. I mean, you read these verses or these words in Job, for example, Job 5:7. As sparks fly upward, man experiences trouble. Right? We don't wait for a season to pass so we can get on with personal discipline. I like to say it this way. However you fill in that blank. Let's say, for example, because I used to say this lie all the time as a pastor. I have 3 young children. I just need to get through this so I can focus on growing spiritually. You know what? I had to come to the realization that A, this is a lie. B, I need to rephrase this. I need to rephrase it this way. I don't just get through young children to get on with life. Young children is our life right now. And it's the very thing that I'm waiting on to be over is the very thing that should be helping me to grow. There's a third lie. Someone who believes this lie is saying, well, I'm the exception. I'm the exception. See, what do you mean by this? Here's where I do my little momentary challenge to you about your online activity, your social media activity, your constant access. Constant access, that's a little tagline for a marketing thing that you hear on the radio around here. Constant contact. Guys, I just have to tell you something. Most of what is online, and especially the social media world, is going to be everything that you need to kill your personal discipline on a daily basis. John Piper said this once. I love this statement. He says, if Facebook ever serves any good purpose, it'll be at the judgment when we realize and admit that we did have time to pray. It's a good statement. It's a good statement. You know, Proverbs 9, verses 15 through 16, is a story of an adulterous lady calling out to a simple person. But she uses the same language that I imagine social media and trash online uses. Listen to these words. Calling to those who pass by, who are making their paths straight. Whoever is naive, let him turn and hear. I'm not saying social media is sin. I'm not saying online activity is all sin. But I do know this, that it can become a controlling factor in your life that pulls you away from growing in spiritual disciplines and personal discipline. Do not think you men can be the exception to that. If you would say to me tonight, you know, I can handle it, you can't. If you say, well, I've been handling it and I'm growing in real significant depth as a man in my personal discipline and my spiritual disciplines, I would tell you, you haven't been handling it as well as you think. And you're not as far as you could be by God's grace. It's a lie. You're not the exception to that. And I know that you know I'm speaking truth on that point. A fourth lie. This person says, I can't do, and fill in the blank with a spiritual discipline. Instead, I'm doing something else. This is the lie that I call selective diligence. I can fill in that first blank with I can't do significant Bible reading or reading spiritually helpful resources. I can't do prayer. Instead, I'm doing something else, and you'll fill that second blank in with something important. Let me pedal backwards a little bit on this and fill it in with an illustration. As a dad, I can't do marriage well. Instead, I'm working on being a good parent. I'm told in Scripture to be a good husband, an intentional husband, taking initiative and leading and protecting and providing. But I'm also told in Scripture to parent my children and to be a good leader and discipline them and train them in the nurture and admonition of the Lord and all that. But if I use my children as my excuse not to do what God says I need to be doing for my wife and with my wife, I'm believing this lie. A lot of people would say, some guys in our church might say, I can't do the men's ministry on Saturday. Instead, I want to have family time. Okay, discipleship, growing in community with other men is important, but so is family time, right? We have verses for both of those. But then I'll get to know them and find out what their family time looked like that evening or that morning was streaming Netflix and burning through a series. It's like, it's a lie. Let me give you another lie. This lie is simple. It simply says, I can't. I've tried to grow in spiritual discipline. I just can't do it. And you say, what's the answer to this? The answer is you can. The Spirit Himself says you can. Where do you get that? Galatians 5:23. The fruit of the Spirit, remember that? Remember the very last one on the list? Enkratia, self-control. Because of the gospel being a reality in your life, an invading, liberating reality in your life, the Spirit gives you in seed form the grace of self-discipline. Now you have to mature it with use, but you can't say, I can't. Well, we need to get through these lies pretty quick here. Here's one more. 6, I'm alone. I'm alone. This is the guy who says, well, I hear the call to be growing in personal discipline and in spiritual disciplines, bringing structure into my life. I hear that, but I'm all alone in this, man. There's no one in my household kind of going the same direction. I'm alone. Or my best buds in the church or at work are not very disciplined spiritually at all. And if I did this, I would be going out on my own, all alone. I don't have any support. There's no support to do this. And I say to you, if there's no support, no problem. Because leadership, by definition, is initiative. You don't wait around for someone to lead you into spiritual discipline necessarily. You are like convinced because of the image of God in you and because of the necessity of structure preceding discipline, which precedes godliness, that you're going to go on this journey whether you go alone or not. You're never alone, by the way. You have Christ. And I don't mean to be cliche-ish with that, but He indwells you. He prays to His Father about you being in Him and He being in you. That's awesome. You know, Jehu, I love to borrow his words from 2 Kings chapter 10, verse 16. You know, he's kind of taken out Ahab's household. I love it. And if you're doing your regular read-through in Scripture, by the time Jehu shows up in your reading schedule, you're like, it's about time, we need some good news. And it's Jehu that stands up in his chariot and he says to his buddy, come with me and see my zeal for the Lord. I like that. One more lie. The older I get, these lies will ease up. That is a lie. I would suggest that whatever was opposing you growing in organization and personal discipline and structure in your younger years as a breeze will be a full head-on hurricane gale in your 60s and 70s. You don't wait around for these lies to go away. They're always going to be present. As a matter of fact, Paul said at the end of his life in 2 Timothy 4, verse 7, I have fought the good fight, I have finished the course, and I have kept the faith. And if you were interviewing him based on the structure of that verse, you would say, Paul, how long have you been running the race? And he would say, well, I ran the race. I'm actually still running right now. Paul, you're at the end of your life. How long did you have to fight? And he says, well, I'm actually still fighting right now at the end. And he would say the same about keeping the faith. Right up to, well, when your toes are hanging into the grave. So once you stare down the reality or the reasons for your inactivity, and perhaps one or more of these lies right here are the reason that you look the same you did at the end of 2020. And it's been 12 months. You need to be honest which of these lies you've been believing. And you need to understand this, that before the gospel tells you to put off certain behavior, it says be renewed in the spirit of your mind. Before the gospel tells you to put on good behavior, it says you need to put off sin and you need to be renewed in the spirit of your mind. In other words, believe God's truth, not lies like this. So you need to stare this down first. Get honest. Secondly, get moving. Get moving. Now, I'm going to quote a couple times from this old classic book on leadership. It's not the best, but it's a good one. J. Oswald Sanders, Spiritual Leadership. Look at this quote. If a Christian is not willing to rise early and work late, to expend greater effort in diligent study and faithful work, that person will not change a generation. Fatigue is the price of leadership. Mediocrity is a result of never getting tired. Now, your Bible is probably still open to 1 Timothy 4, right? 1 Timothy 4, 7 and 8. Remember it? It says, discipline yourself for the purpose of godliness. If discipline precedes godliness, structure precedes discipline. You say, I don't like structure. That's legalism, right? Don't tell me to read my Bible. Don't tell me to read it through in a year. Don't tell me I need to pray every day. This reeks of legalism. I want to challenge your thinking on that. Can someone treat this stuff legalistically? Legalism, by the way, is saying, God, I'm doing certain things or not doing certain things to make you owe me something. That's legalism. But the presence of structure itself does not mean that legalism is present. You say, I don't like structure. It's too restricting. And here's where I'm going to say to you guys, and I believe I'm in the spirit of 1 Timothy 4:7 here. Discipline doesn't restrict you. Structure doesn't restrict you. Listen, guys, structure frees you. My daughter, I have twin daughters. They're going to be 30 this next year. Both of them play the piano. They've taken piano since they were 5. Now they both teach piano. They use it and for performances, stuff like that. They're really good. They went to college to study piano, and before they went to college, they studied under a Juilliard grad in the Hampton Roads area of Virginia. So they're real serious. I can't play the piano. I just marvel at it. And if you were to go up, say, to my daughter Janelle, right now, say, Janelle, I have something for you, and you hand her classical piano music, Chopin or something like that. You know, the kind of music where there's more ink on the page than the white on the page. If you handed that to my daughter Janelle, and it was a piece she's never seen before, here's what Janelle will do. She'll take it from you, she'll go to the piano, she'll pluck it out, she'll do a couple things, talk to herself, and in just a few moments, she'll just flow with that music. It'll be beautiful. She has freedom with that music. Say, wait, just a minute, Janelle. You've never seen that music before. How can you play it so effortlessly, so freely, just with a moment's notice? And she would say, Dad, do you remember all of the lessons we took and how many times we practiced and how we got in trouble with our teachers for not practicing and in trouble with you and Mom? Remember that? Yeah. But what she's saying, because there was structure and repetition, I now have freedom. You show me the man in your life that you look up to spiritually. One that's as consistent as the sun coming up. Someone who walks with the Lord in the worst of times and in the greatest of times. And they're not perfect, but there is a continuity to their life that you just sit back and you go, wow. I'll show you a person who had structure in their life to get to that point, and now they have freedom. You need to get moving, and you need to get going with structure. So the question is this: what is a realistic plan for you as far as starting to set up structure in your life? Now, you have to answer that for you. I'm going to share some things that work for me, but that doesn't mean it's going to work for you. But I do think you need to identify a couple of things. Well, there's a slide I forgot about. Look at that. Discipline precedes godliness. Structure precedes discipline. But you have to identify several realities. First of all, you need to figure out what are your God-ordained responsibilities for your life at this chapter right now, at the end of 2021. God-ordained responsibilities. You say, like, what do you mean? What does God call you to be and do as a man where He's planted you now? You're in a church, you're at Grace Baptist Church. That's part of your God-ordained responsibilities. If you're married, you have God-ordained responsibilities called being a husband for your wife. If you have kids, it's being a father. If you have a job, it's being a grace-filled, gospel-driven employee. You say, well, I don't have clarity on what my responsibilities are from the Bible at this chapter of my life. Then talk to someone. Talk to your elders here. Talk to each other. Say, as you see me, what are my, if I could reduce it down to the primary gospel primary God-ordained responsibilities, what would they be? Okay? Another reality you need to wrestle with before you can set up the structure is the concept of time blocks. Time blocks. This is where you become more intentional and more aware of every waking hour in your week. Okay? You have an intentional time of getting up, you're in bed at a certain time, and in that you are going to have to fit your God-ordained responsibilities. You need to get a calendar, guys. Open it up on your phone and learn to prize routine. What's a third reality? Personal refreshment. See, sometimes when we talk about personal discipline, we're like, well, that means we're not going to have any fun. We're just going to read our Bibles and walk into the walls because we're praying all the time. Not that at all. There's got to be refreshment. Remember, you're an image bearer of God, and even God demonstrates the importance of rest. So when I say personal refreshment, I'm talking about the concept of rest in your life. You've got to have appropriate rest, and I fail at this one so bad. I don't slow down and I don't stop. You have to have times of hobbies. And even if you're in the ministry, when I teach at a seminary, I will talk to the guys in the room. I'll say, you've got to speak another language other than Bible. Asher and I were talking pocket knives a minute ago. It's a language I can talk, and I enjoy that. It's something my dad got me into decades ago, and I still enjoy. I can talk. I'm not military, but after 11 years in Virginia Beach, I have a lot of buddies that were on the even-numbered SEAL teams there at Little Creek in Virginia Beach. I can talk that. Were you a Navy SEAL too? No? Yeah, that's a great question. The being mediocre and not being fatigued because of hard work. I like what my pastor from when I was in South Carolina used to say. Recreation is a biblical concept. As long as it's not the activity of a sluggard to avoid work, but it's a time of being refreshed and rested. That's why we call it recreation. I am going to rest. I'm going to stop. I'm going to unplug, not for the sake of being a sluggard, but just to refresh my mind and my body. That's it. There's an immaterial part of me and a material part of me. I'm a dichotomist, so I don't know where you guys are, but that's where I am. And in the counseling world, the biblical counseling world, people come in with spiritual issues, but we also have to talk a lot to them about how to take care of your physical body, because you are connected with that. Your inner man and your outer man are connected. The outer man is the vehicle that's carrying around your inner man, so to speak. And I actually think Romans 8 has a lot to say about that. And if we're not taking care of our outer man by getting it rested and refreshed, we are opening a beachhead for sin. Jim Berg used to say this all the time: I am as spiritual as I am rested. And I think that's true. I think that's true. So it's a good question. But for personal refreshment, I'm talking hobbies. I want to give you a concept here for you to chew on. This is just, again, some reflections. I was asked to reflect and to talk to you tonight. With me, a lot of my personal refreshment, how's that sound? Refreshment, I find tied to God's general revelation. You say, what's special revelation? Scripture. General revelation is creation. And general revelation, as Paul says in Romans, has the task of showing to me that there is a God, His eternal power and Godhead, and I'm not Him. And I need to be reconciled to Him. But general revelation doesn't give me the answer. General revelation says, you better get to the answer of how to be reconciled to God, and it drives me to special revelation. But general revelation also, I find, to be very restful and invigorating. Watch this. When you watch a musician create content of lyrics or sound, they're demonstrating, in a sense, the image of God, because He's creative. Even when an unsaved person is creative and beautiful with it, they're giving inadvertent praise to God. Look at the not just creativity, but nature. Hiking up in the Huron National Forest. Jay and I got to do that with our wives a few weeks ago. It's just refreshing to be out in nature and see the Creator's work. Issues of beauty, art, and music, all of this is refreshing. And I think it's very intentional in creation, that creation itself is a place where we can recharge. One more thing. Realistic progress. These are 4 realities you need to wrestle with before I would recommend you put your structure down on paper. In other words, this is going to flow a lot with letter A. What are your responsibilities, and how can I be making consistent progress in those responsibilities? What are projects I could be working on? How can I be developing in a personal and professional way? So it's here that I want to, again, I'm just doing what your pastor asked. I just took a picture of my planning journal, okay? This is something that I also type up in a Word document and I give to the leadership at our church, so they know how they can expect me to be dividing my week up. Now, I'm a pastor, so mine looks like this, but whatever role you play, you are awake for certain hours of the day. And what I challenge you to do is go Monday through Sunday and figure out how are you going to spend the gift of time. My pastor in Virginia Beach always used to remind us, he always referred to the tomb of time. We're almost finished with today, and after we're finished with today, it goes into the tomb of time, he would say. You get to spend it one time. So what I do as a pastor is then again, this is just what works for me. On Mondays, that's my family day, and people know unless you're bleeding or dying, I'm going to be focusing on my wife. Or my refreshment. On Tuesdays and Thursdays in the morning up until lunch, I focus on projects. You say, what are the projects you're working on right now? Well, I'm supposed to be writing a little booklet for a biblical counseling publisher that I've been putting off for 4 years. I'm also supposed to be redoing our bylaws for our church. I'm doing some things for the wilds. And these are just little things, and I have a running list of 3 or 4 projects I need to be working on, and if I know I need to be working on them and I don't put time on the paper to work on them, then I will just be cramming the week before the event. So I put projects on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. Wednesday mornings I do study for Wednesday night. Tuesday afternoon, projects, visits, and meetings. Tuesday nights open, unless we need to counsel. You can see what I'm doing here. I'm not going to read the whole thing. But if you look down at the bottom of the page, these are things, I didn't write this up for your thing tonight. These are things I wrote down months ago. I give my mornings to God, afternoons to men, and evenings to Lori on a typical workday. I get that from Steve Lawson. My Sunday priorities are preaching, pastoring, leading, and meetings. Tuesday and Thursday p.m. I leave open for ministry with my wife. This is just one example. This works for me. And you know what that means? I can work hard. Like yesterday was just a day of meetings. I drove to do visits to 2 different rehab centers. I counseled and all that. But I knew that if I worked hard yesterday, then all day today, I can study for Sunday. That's just one example. But you got to have structure. You say, I don't like that, I'm not a pastor. You do have a life, and you do have God-ordained responsibilities and the responsibility to take care of your temple. What's yours going to look like? This is where I just want you to banter about this with each other. This is where you get a couple of your buddies at your table and you say, here's what I'm thinking for my week. This is called structure. Okay? If the grid is laid out, and we're going to go quickly through the rest, the third part of the plan is get full. Get full. And here's where I just really want to stretch you guys again. What's the first priority of the grid? The first priority, some of you aren't going to like this, is reading. You got to be a reader. Francis Bacon, speaking makes a ready man, writing makes an exact man, reading makes a full man. Al Mohler, without apology, the Christian leader is a devoted student and a lifelong learner. He's right. Again, J. Oswald Sanders, a couple by Sanders. If a man is known by the company he keeps, so also his character is reflected in the books he reads. Why read? Read to refill the wells of inspiration. The leader who intends to grow spiritually and intellectually will be reading constantly. Leaders should determine to spend a minimum of, I like this, half an hour a day reading books that feed the soul and stimulate the mind. Reading's important, and I put that as a high priority for your grid. As I mentioned, I have friends who are SEALs, Navy SEALs. I just brought a Navy SEAL in to speak to my men at our church just 4 weeks ago for our conference. You say, well, how do you know these Navy SEALs? Not only did I live in the same town with them for 11 years, but for some reason, and I never hung this shingle out when I was in Virginia Beach, but my wife and I found ourselves counseling Navy SEALs often for marriage because that career just wreaks havoc on your marriage. And by the time they were sitting in my living room or my office with me and my wife, it's because the SEAL had been adulterous. And sometimes it happens on deployment, but usually it's on the workup for deployment where they're still in the States but traveling to different states to train for an upcoming deployment. And these guys would come in, and by the way, some of the SEALs are big like you see on TV. Others, you'd never guess they were a Navy SEAL. But I've had several SEALs tell me when I started clamping down and giving them things to work on and moving them towards spiritual disciplines, they would say to me, we're not a reader. I'm not a reader. I'm not a good reader. That's why I'm a SEAL. I'm not a good reader. And I'd hear that often. And so every time I heard it, I had a response. I'd say, then tell me, how did you prep for buds to get through that and Hell Week and all that? Oh, they're just talking about the books they read about buds and the guys they talked to and the counsel they got from other SEALs of how to make it through buds. And then I'd say, what was jump school like? You passed buds because you're a SEAL. What was jump school after that like? And they're like, oh man, we had to go to all these classes and do this and learn not to do that and do different types of jumps. I'm like, man, that's fascinating. I know that you guys I know you always have an EOD technician travel with your teams. That's an explosive ordnance disposal guy. I said, but I also know you have to get trained in basic EOD techniques in case your guy's not available. What's that like? Oh, man, you have to learn so much about disarming bombs. And they'd just go on and tell them. And I'd ask them, tell me about the beliefs of Islam. because they study the enemy. I would say, hey, talk to me about different steels for knives. And I just go in, and they'd catch themselves. They're like, I know a lot. I know a lot about what's important to me. And they got that from classrooms. They got it from manuals. They got it from websites. Everyone is a reader and a learner at some level. You are. If you're interested in sports, you can tell me all about sports. Why? Because you're taking in information. If you're into the NRA, you're going to tell me all that stuff too, okay? I'll prove that you're a reader or a listener. I just need to know what's important to you. Never again, guys, say that you can't be a reader. Be honest enough to say that you won't be a reader unless it's a matter of interest to you. Even Paul, at the end of his life, in 2 Timothy 4 says, when you come, Timothy, bring the cloak which I left at Troas with Carpus and the books and especially the parchments. Even at the end, he's reading. So I suggest, men, that you establish a daily, weekly priority to do 3 types of reading. Okay? First type of reading is what I'll call God reading. What's God reading? God reading is Bible reading. It's Bible reading. It's taking the book in your hand or on your screen and holding it to its claim that you read in 2 Timothy 3:15 and 16. God's word gives me wisdom leading to salvation, verse 15. And it's also profitable for me as a believer for doctrine, that's to tell me what's right, for reproof, that's to tell me what's wrong, for correction, that's how to fix what's wrong, and for training in righteousness, that's how to keep right what's right. And you read it. You take it and you hold it at its claim. Again, Al Mohler says, our spiritual maturity will never exceed our knowledge of the Bible. There are some keys to Bible reading, though, guys. Some important keys. You have to have a consistent time and place. Now, I don't know what that is for you. It's when you're going to be alert. It has to be a specific time and place as a norm. You can break away from that. You're going to be away from your stuff. You're going to be away from home and out of your schedule. But if you say, because sometimes you're going to be away from your home and your schedule, I'm not going to try to do anything consistent, how did that work for you last year? For me, I get out of bed at 6, and I have to be downstairs with my cup of coffee and my Yeti at around 6:15, 6:20. And I just got to get into the Word. Have a consistent time and place and repeat, repeat, repeat. And I say this, another key for Bible reading is this, make it an adventure. I had a guy tell me this week who's struggling with consistency in Bible reading at all. He's convinced he does it well, but when I ask him how frequently and is it meaningful to him, he's like, what do you read? Well, I pick something that day. I'm like, well, that's not an adventure. By an adventure, just getting real practical, guys, read a translation you've never read before, all the way through. Find a schedule, a simple one or a full-blown go through the Bible in 90-day schedule, and make it an adventure. And the more you have that adventure, the more exciting it gets every time. And a third part of that is have good coffee. Bad coffee is not good for your devotions, okay? I've enclosed 2 different Bible reading schedules in your packet. There's one by the Navigators. It's called 5 by 5 by 5, and that's what I'm having the men in our church do. It's 5 minutes a day. That's it. It's very basic. It's only New Testament, Psalms, and Proverbs. It's not my fave, but I want my guys to be reading the Bible. I have a lot of men. I'll have 32 men at my meeting tomorrow morning, and I'd say a third to half of them are reading with any kind of regularity. I just want everyone to get started. The other schedule is my favorite. This is the one I challenge my church with every January, and it's reading through the whole Bible chronologically. I mean, you're stopping after you meet Abraham and you're going over to Job and doing Job, and then coming back. And it's just a wonderful unfolding of God's Word. Make it an adventure. Second type of reading, not just God reading, but growth reading. You say, what's growth reading? It's what it says. I encourage you to read biblical counseling books here, theology books, leadership books, church books, on the church, like 9-mark stuff. Relationship books, counseling, theology, leadership, church, and relationships for starters. This is where it's just you and God in the pages of Scripture with letter A. With letter B, you're kind of getting systematic now on certain topics. But there's a third type of reading, and I just call it general reading. And here again, I'm reaching for that concept of general revelation. General revelation. Read about a hobby. It doesn't have to be about Jesus. It doesn't have to be about just a hobby. Read about creation itself. Some of my nerd reading is on astronomy. I just like astronomy. Liked it as a kid, moving back towards it as an old man. Read fiction, good fiction. Read history. You look in the Bible, Solomon knew all about trees. What? Paul knew a lot about athletics and military. Luke knew a lot about the human body. It's okay to know something like that. Psalm 111, verse 12 or verse 2 says, "Great are the works of the Lord, and they are studied by all who delight in them." So delight in them. So if you look in your packet here, again, I just took a picture of things I wrote down months ago in my journal, different types of reading. And I just want to encourage you to start different categories, and then don't let yourself repeat a category until you've read one from each category. For example, this one here where it says reading rotation at the top, these are notes to myself. I never knew I was going to put these on an overhead. In the morning, I wanted to do this kind of reading at the office, and this is when I do it. The morning reading is fast, and it's deep, and it has to do with work as a pastor. My PM reading is slow, it's fun, and I'm not marking the pages up. And I'd like to do, when I'm in stride, 30 minutes of each. 30 in the morning, 30 at night. Mornings I read for depth, evening for relaxation. And I must read through each category before repeating a category. In the mornings I read work-related stuff, pastoral, theological issues, counseling, family. In the evenings I read hobbies, bio, fiction sometimes, and leadership. And then here's my running list that I had a couple months ago. I need to check some more of these off still. And when someone tells me you need to read a book, I'll write it down if it's an interest to me. But I'll read a pastoral book, and I won't read another pastoral book till I've also read an issues and a counseling and a family book. This has worked for me. Now, the evening reading's a lot more fun, and I have a running list of books on hobbies, history, fiction, and leadership that I like to read, and these are books that I'm still looking forward to finishing these lists. That just works for me. If you turn over one more page in your packet, there's a reading rotation that I put together. I was challenged to do this when I was in Richmond as a youth pastor, where, and it's a similar concept. It's theology and issues, biblical counseling. You can read across the top, and I would write the titles down of what I wanted to read in the next year or two for each of those. And again, I would read one, but I couldn't read another one in that category until I've had a balanced diet. You say, that's rigid. It's structure, and it works for me. Yes? Yeah. I mean, I would force myself, because when I was a youth pastor, I'd want to read only biblical counseling and theological issues. I mean, I would pound that and not read on preaching or marriage. And I cross it off, and I didn't keep myself across the board. I have to always read in this order, but I needed to see a check mark under each column before I could start repeating. It just forced a balanced diet on me. So again, it's just something that has worked for me. We need to finish this up here. But I do have a picture of a barbell up here I want to show you. There's two types of reading. I say there's three, but really there's two. There's Bible reading and book reading. I want you to think of a barbell. Those of you that work out, if you were to lie down underneath that barbell on a bench press and you took all the weights off of one side and you were going to try to bench press that, how fun, that would be unfun, wouldn't it? To bench press that with no weights on one end. If you've never worked out before, that's not the way to start, and it's not the way to do it if you're experienced. You can't bring that into the reading world. You can't just read books and say, I'm growing, and you're not reading the Bible. You can't just read the Bible and say, well, I'm not systematizing it with good books that are helping or letting me enjoy general revelation. What I suggest to you is wherever you are, just start with one weight on each, even if it's a light weight. Here's what we're doing. Here's what I'm trying to do with the men of my church this season of our men's ministry. It goes from November through May. I'm giving them the 5 by 5 by 5 Bible reading schedule because any guy can do that. And I've gotten them Stuart Scott's new book called 31 Ways to Love One Another. And it's a page and a half each chapter on each of the one another passages of the New Testament with like 3 questions. And I am having them read 1 chapter a week. Now I got guys, I got earned doctorates and attorneys in my church and doctors. But I also got a lot of other guys that they don't read their Bible and they can't even think they could read a book right now. And I'm just drawing the line there because the guys that are going to be big readers are going to be big readers anyway on the side and on their own time. But I want to carry all the men of our church into a wave towards having a balanced approach to reading, even if we're starting really light. But I'm saying you got to have barbells on both ends of that. I want them reading the Bible and helpful books. You say, well, books aren't the Bible. They're not. But you know, Proverbs has a lot to say about in the multitude of counselors there's victory. Warren Wiersbe used to look around his office at his books, his library, and he says, my library is not big, but these books are my friends, and I know I can go to them for counsel. I know what they're going to speak to me. So look at reading as part of receiving good counsel. All right, where are we? The fourth part is get together. Get together. You say, is this a private deal, growing in personal discipline? No, it just, you need each other. Iron sharpens iron. This Navy SEAL told my men when he spoke to them last month on Proverbs 27:17, if iron sharpens iron, then both pieces need to show up. And not only do both pieces of the iron need to show up, one needs to be hard and the other one needs to be changed. Okay? Do this together, guys. I keep coming. I might as well just give you all the answers there, right? There they go. We do this together. We studied to promote love and good deeds with each other. So first of all, commit to the concept of personal discipline and structure together. Talk about it with each other. Share the specifics together. What's your plan going to be? What's your weekly grid going to be like? What kind of reading rotation are you going to come up with and why? And talk with each other about each other's. And then face deadlines. Set yourself some deadlines. The beauty of a Bible reading schedule is it comes to an end and you're finished. Face deadlines on projects, on your reading, things we've been talking about. But do this, though, just as in the military, allow each other's 5-part plan to look differently. Okay, Jay's doesn't need to look like Asher's. Asher's doesn't need to look like Alex. Alex doesn't need to look like Kevin's. All right? Just like these SEALs. They all have different training, different capabilities, different personalities, different skills, different likes and dislikes, but they all are focused on the same single objective, and it's the mission. And that leads to the final part. Part 5, get clarity. This is the mission. I mean, what's the end game of spiritual discipline? What's the end game of growing in personal discipline? It's the same for all of us. The big picture is becoming more like Christ. The big picture is godliness. Here's how we say it at our church, at Calvary Baptist Church. This is a 6-sermon chart. I'm just going to point it out to you just so you know we're speaking a language over at our church, and this is what I'm trying to challenge my men with to grow, to lead our church. Ephesians 4:13 says a true disciple, the word disciple is not in that verse, but a growing believer is growing in Christ-centered doctrine, a Christ-word passion, and Christ-like brilliance. You show me someone who wants to grow to be like Christ, I'll show you someone who's not going to stand still. They're going to grow up towards God as a worshiper. That's the first great command. They're going to grow out towards all people as a servant. That's the second great command. As they are a servant to all men, they're going to realize there are saved people I'm serving, but there are unsaved people I'm serving. So they also grow towards the unsaved as a witness. And then what happens? They're always going to have someone near them that needs to be discipled, and they're going to be a discipler. You say, well, what do they disciple other people to do? To grow to God as a worshiper, towards all men as a servant, towards the lost as a witness. Now, that's a long series right there, but that's what we're trying to do as a church family, and we talk that language all the time. That's how we get clarity. How are you going to get clarity? How are you going to know when you're becoming more like Jesus? Jesus is our example of worshiper. Obviously, he's consumed with his glory, his Father's glory. He's a servant to all men. He didn't come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for all. Witness, of course, he's the Word. He's the center of the gospel. The whole Bible is focused on him, and he made disciples. You've got to have clarity. You're not going to get personally disciplined and grow into spiritual disciplines merely to be noticed. You're not doing it for that. Some of the most spiritually disciplined men are some of the most unassuming people, but there's a consistency to them and a growing Christ-likeness to them by God's grace. So, William Farley put it this way: when women lead, men withdraw from both church and home. But when male servant leaders abound, young men eagerly volunteer to serve. Vibrant, godly male leadership attracts men. It encourages their involvement. It motivates them to serve in the church and home. And men are irresistibly attracted to other men who model biblical masculinity. I think he's right. A.W. Tozer. The most critical need of the church at this moment is men, bold men, free men. And I would argue that a disciplined man is the only free man. The church must seek in prayer and much humility the coming again of men made of the stuff of which prophets and martyrs are made. So my goal tonight is to leave you with a 5-part plan to banter around, to debate, to discuss. Don't adopt it, but adapt it. And I'm not asking you to sprint, I'm asking you to marathon. All right? That's the end game. So, we're about out of time. Do you want to do any Q&A, or do we need to wind things up? We've had some good questions already. This has been good. This is what happened when Jay sends you a text message at 6:30 in the morning. No questions? Okay. Yep.
I couldn't be more pleased. That was exactly what I was looking for. You nailed it, man. Thank you so much. So much wisdom there. I was like drinking from a fire hose, and just a lot to digest there. So thank you so much, and I look forward to, as elders, helping some of you guys implement some of these things in your life as I implement them in mine, as I grow in discipline. So let's pray, and then I am going to ask you to help me out because the ladies are having a gathering tomorrow night. So if you could help me kind of clean things up, get ready for the ladies tomorrow night, and just try to dodge the Nerf gun bullets shortly flying. Thank you. Thank you so much. Father, we thank you again for this time we've had together tonight. Lord, I pray that you would make us men who live structured, disciplined lives for your glory, so that we can become more like Christ for your glory, so that we can witness